Alright. What's up, everybody, and welcome back. It's been a little bit since we've covered any Battle Aces content, but just 3 hours ago, David Kim from Uncapped Games has posted a dev update, and it's quite a long one. I was like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff to go through here. So let's read through it and see what the heck they're updating us on. We want to talk about unit updates we've been working on since the end of CBT 1 today. I love when they just use this. Obviously, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, something that's very good for your mental health. I don't know what this means. I'm imagining closed beta test 1 today. We've been iterating quite a lot, so this might turn out to be quite a long update. Overall, we're having so much fun playing Battle Aces. There are many more combinations to explore. Team members who are strong at the strategy side of the game are having a great time with much higher win ratios against higher skilled players. Granted, higher skilled players will catch up quickly. No ETA yet, still on when the next test is, due to continuing to iron out our planning of what exactly the second test will have in it. So, first big thing they're working on is turrets. Turrets have changed to anti-ground only and very strong for cost. They are countered by air or big units. Also, heavy turrets have changed to be anti-air focused, also very strong for cost and still shoot ground, countered by ground or big air. We've talked about this before, but as we continue to explore making turrets viable and strong as a defensive play option, it creates an endgame issue where both players are maxed out on bandwidth due to turrets not having a bandwidth cost. Bandwidth is supply, I believe. So what we're trying next on this front is adding a bandwidth cost to turrets, adding an unset up ability to turrets, and when you use the ability, it just destroys the turret, freeing up bandwidth. Do we get a refund for that? Sounds like no. I'm not sure if we get a refund or not for that. Turrets also aren't selectable by the Select All Army button. Overall, our internal team members who have always wanted to play a much more defensive playstyle are very much enjoying the turrets being more viable now. And for fun. Who wins with how much left? 1 heavy turret versus 7 dragonflies. We'll put answer in the comments. Oh, okay, let's play this quiz first, guys. Heavy turrets changed to anti-ground only and very strong for cost. I like this very strong for cost, by the way, so turrets are going to be like way more powerful. This is something Printf will be very excited by. I mean, if this is anti-air focused and it's countered by big air, dragonflies is not big air. 1 versus 7. I don't know if they haven't changed the cost. I mean, the cost of turrets was already very cheap because the turret was like 150, wasn't it? Something like that, or 125. It was pretty cheap. Whereas these guys are going to be, oh gosh, I haven't been playing Battle Aces in a few weeks and I'm forgetting things. 125, 125? How much is the standard tier 2 unit, guys? It was 125, 125. Anyway, so if it beats all of them, that's crazy. I'm going to say there's 2 dragonflies left, 3 dragonflies. I mean, 7 versus 1 is insane. If it beats 7 while costing less, there's efficiency and then there's that. I think 3 dragonflies will be left, which still means the turret is incredibly good. All right, let's scroll down and see if we got that right. Oh, really? It wins? Maybe the heavy turret costs more than the regular turret, because that beating 7 dragonflies. So for those who don't know, 125 times 7. It's 875 red and blue resource for a heavy for the dragonflies. Chat says, I think it was 250 for the heavy turret. I hope it is, because otherwise that's obscene efficiency. It is static defense. It's meant to be very efficient, but you know, and that is the one thing that it's good at being defending. I like that. That's a really cute way of getting some engagement and stuff, doing a little quiz. I love how playful Uncapped Games have been with a lot of their posts. They've been having some fun. Anti-air units. We've been moving towards having a smaller advantage between tier 1 and tier 2 anti-air options in order to lean more clearly into the tier 1 choice of bringing 1 or 2 matter-only units. We also wanted to more heavily distinguish the tier 3 anti-air options and have made some changes. Okay, so what do they mean? In order to lean more clearly into the tier 1 choice of bringing 1 or 2 matter-only units. I mean, you always bring 1 matter-only unit, right? Your basic unit. And then usually 1 anti-air or a second matter-only unit. So I guess I don't quite understand that sentence. Predator is back to being splash damage. Great versus most air, countered by big air. Oh, that's cool. So Predator's going to go back to countering locusts and dragonflies and these sort of massable air units. I like that. Predator is also moved to the advanced Starforge. Predator was advanced Foundry before. Now it's advanced Starforge. Does that mean Foundry doesn't have any anti-air options? Other than Heavy Hunter? Because it was Heavy Hunter was the only tier 2 option. Predator was the only tier 3 option that shoots up. So now it's just the Heavy Hunter. Advanced bot is now stronger versus air and moved to the advanced foundry. Oh, great versus air countered by splash. For those who don't know, guys, this is not the assault bot. The assault bot is basically a souped up gun bot that barely survives one mortar shot, whereas the original gun bot gets one shot. It's also the one that does 2.5 times damage. This is the anti-air versatile one. I did enjoy using this unit, the advanced bot, but it was a tier 3 Starforge slot. Advanced Starforge, I guess is what we call that. Now it's going to go to advanced foundry. Okay. Because I do remember I had one lineup, which was really silly, where I could make an advanced bots and assault bots in the same late game lineup. Terrible against splash damage. Just very funny to see basically a massive bots countering air and ground. All right, guys. So now they've redefined the advanced blink as an AA unit. It's a big unit now as well. That's also anti-air. It's great versus splash and big air, but it's countered by anti-big. So things like destroyers are now going to actually do really well versus advanced blink. Though I guess the blink can still jump on them and blink away and stuff, but things like destroyers wouldn't do much better. It's also soft countered by small air. So I guess because they're not going to do as much damage to small air. So that's kind of good because these guys were a bit too well-rounded. It says you can think of them as mammoths on the ground. So they're kind of like a tank, but it also shoots up. So they're kind of like a tank plus anti-big air unit. That's interesting. The main reason for this is we wanted a more clear role for this unit instead of it just being generally good or bad versus everything, depending on the current tuning. And a multi-purpose big unit that is also anti-air looked to be a unique role that creates interesting situations. I think this is probably a good change. I remember when I discovered the advanced blink, you guys know I had like a YouTube video where I just went on a streak the first time ever using them. And I was just kind of like, let's just rush tier 3 off 3 base every time. And the number of games I won with it was insane. I even beat Parting in that video, like one of the very few games. I beat Parting like twice or something in Battle Aces, maybe 3 times. And one of the few games was in that. And it's because I didn't rush them, and he tried to rush them off like no economy, and I overwhelmed him because he was so like, oh, I've got to get the OP advanced blink, that he just left himself open and let me kill his entire economy because he spent way too much money teching up. So it was so strong. You either won by rushing to it, or people were so like, oh, that unit's so OP, I'm going to be stupidly greedy trying to get to it. So it was a bit too good. I like this change. I mean, I have to see how it plays out. I'm going to miss it. Don't get me wrong. There's part of me that's like, don't take away my OP tool, because it was OP in a fun, satisfying way. And that's, sometimes there's got to be some things that are a little OP in there. All right. Tier 1 anti-air units cost ratio. We wanted to reduce the tedious math problem we currently have with the 3-to-1 cost ratio of tier 1, since everything else that has an energy cost is 1-to-1 ratio. Also, with the tier 2 anti-air unit changes, so we made them 50-50 cost instead of 75-25. Also, we've increased their effectiveness against air and reduced their effectiveness versus ground to make their role clearer as well. I mean, I was kind of making fun of how everyone just kept mixing in like Hornets or Blink Hunters with their ground army, and I was like, sure, it's nice to have a ranged unit behind your melee unit, but it's not worth the 75-25 cost for the damage they do. They're going to make it even more clear, guys, stop making anti-air units to fight ground. Like, it wasn't good before. We're going to make it even worse so that you realize you're playing the game wrong. I like to have strong opinions. I know some people are like, no, they're really good. And there was a lot of high-level players who were saying the same thing. And I'm like, you guys are completely wrong. I was like, outside of very specific moments in the game, you should not just generically be making a pack of anti-air units to fight against ground. Unless you're worried about their Starforge coming online, you want to pre-build them, it does not make sense to just use them to help win a tier 1 battle. So that's going to be even more clear now. It's also going to be something where it almost might be, there's going to be a big power swing, because the big problem you often run into, if you were trying to stay a bit later on the tech up and stuff, and you're relying on tier 1 anti-air, sometimes you just didn't have enough matter, but you had a ton of energy. So you just couldn't reactively build enough anti-air. Now, it's going to be more about managing your energy rather than your matter, right? To make sure you can get those anti-air units out. I'm really curious to see how this scales and how that plays out. I worry that they might be too good versus air, because if they're stronger, right? If they're better versus anti-air, are things like Falcons just going to get wrecked? Because Falcons have to exist in the game as a way to punish people, in the current meta at least, for not taking tier 2 anti-air units. Falcon's a very kind of important piece. If you remove the ability for air units to like a very slow, powerful, tanky air unit like the Falcon to just basically overwhelm people who don't invest in higher tier anti-air options, it might create a thing where no one makes anti-air other than the tier 1 anti-air. And the only real way you can get value with their units is like, I'll build 3 dragonflies and just run around their bases, forcing them to leave anti-air everywhere. But it's never about doing damage anymore with air. It's just about forcing an overreaction. It's going to be interesting to see how that balances out. Now, here's a big one, guys. Recoil Shocker range increase. For those who don't know, the Recoil Shocker is the goddamn lizard, the chameleon or whatever with the shock cannon on its back. This is basically a troll unit in the meta before this, where you use it for a highlight reel. You have it in your roster as a recall thing, and if someone dives on a base, you will reactively make these and recall them on top of their army. Because if you're not recalling on top of their army, they're so slow, they're geriatric, and their range is quite short, they're just useless. If your opponent has any decent range at all, they're not going to do anything unless you recall them on top of their army. So what they're doing now is they're saying, well, we're increasing the range. So, you know, they can't just get kited to death now, right? This is going to be a bit different. So we increased their range quite a bit. We also reverted the health buff we gave them earlier. So they're 40% higher now compared to, say, like a Shocker. Now, is that 40% higher range or hit points? Oh, David, are you watching the stream by any chance? I did tell David that I was like, because he linked this to me, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I'm gonna go look at this on stream. I don't know if he's in chat or on Discord or anything. Let me see. I'm gonna message him right now. It's range. Okay, he's talking about range. All right. I'm like, he is watching. Hi, David. Hi. So 40% higher now compared to a Shocker. Okay. Shockers don't have great range. That's pretty good range. Yeah, that's pretty good range. It's still a very immobile unit though. But I mean, you can recall it out of trouble. 40% big range. Wow. That's more than double its old range, right? I think that's more than double its old range. It's kind of like a very slow piece of artillery now. Oh, I can't wait to see this in action. Recoil Shocker finally feels viable now. Also, more importantly, they feel unique in their strength compared to other tier 2 splash options. Curious how actual testing goes once you guys have a chance to play with them in the future. I can't remember if they do as much damage or splash as like a Shocker or anything else. I feel like they do a little less damage than a Shocker per shot. But we can actually look that up really quickly. We'll see. Since the numbers haven't changed on their attack at all, we can see here Recoil Shocker. And then also regular Shocker. So if we look at their ground attack, damage, ground, that's here, 660. Yeah, they do the same damage. And previously, the range was the same for both. Ah, it was the same for both. Okay, never mind. I thought the Recoil Shocker had less range than the Shocker before. Okay, so it's gone from like 10 to like, say, 14 range, something like that. And it's the same damage, still 600 damage, which is a very consistent number you're going to see in this game. It's the same damage a heavy ballista does per shot, though heavy ballista obviously shoots very fast. I believe it's the same damage the mortar does, right? Yeah, mortar also does 600. So a lot of the big splash damages in this game, they're all at that 600. 600 is like a kind of important breakpoint number. And the reason is, if you look at some of the basic units, the gunbot has 600 hit points. So the gunbot gets one shot just perfectly. And then there's things like crabs take 4 shots to kill because they're super tanky. Scorpions, I think, take 2, if we remember correctly. Scorpions actually take 3, not 2, because they're 1350 hit points. Yeah. And most of the other small units, they all take 2, like blinks and that sort of thing. Blinks just barely die in 2 shots. Recalls, I think, barely die in 2 shots as well. They're both 1200 hit points. So those kind of 600 divisible splash damage, it's like a very important number to keep in mind. But yeah, 14 range. I think the Recoil Shocker is going to be a very useful kind of artillery splash damage unit. Is it going to be overpowered? I have no idea. I think there's too many cases. I got to get in there and play with the units before I make any kind of definitive statements on that. All right, guys, here's one which is kind of an intuitive change. This one was strange in that the heavy ballista looks so big, but it isn't actually big. So we corrected this mistake. We're going to work on tuning needed to make this network if necessary. It was kind of funny how heavy ballistas countered destroyers before, which was kind of unintuitive because destroyers counter all the other big units and the heavy ballista is a fat, chunky boy. So this is kind of, I think this is a really good change. I think this is a really good change in terms of intuitiveness. It does mean they'll be a little stronger at dealing with mortars. And stuff like that, because they're going to take less damage from splash now. but they will be a bit more targetable by things like destroyers that do bonus to big. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. We've also got all splash units deal 50% less damage against big. So it's not just a mortar change, all splash units, shockers, swift shockers, everything, all the AoE, all the splash damage is going to do 50% less, which is cool. I think that they're really working here. So we're getting this. Look, so they're like, look, some splash units had this, others didn't. We feel like it's too confusing. So we've got a new counter square here, and they got a little image. Anti-big beats big, big beats splash. Right, that makes sense, right? So anti-big is like a destroyer, right? Destroyers snipe down your big units, your king crabs, your crusaders on the front line. Your big tanky boys on the front lines are obviously going to be good at breaking splash damage lines of like mortars, shockers, that sort of stuff. But mortars, shockers, etc. are always going to crush small units, gunbots, scorpions especially, right? Wasps, these units. Those small units are going to be able to swarm over things like destroyers, the anti-big units, and then it goes back around. So I think this is good. This is quite intuitive. Yeah, I think this makes perfect sense. What about air? Air's its own separate thing. Is there a clear order where like there's anti-big air and then big air counters anti-air, but the thing is, because well, some of the units don't interact directly with each other, so you can't have like a circle or a triangle with air, because you've got ground units that shoot up against air units that don't necessarily shoot down always sometimes, and stuff like that. So it's a bit more complicated. I think air is like its own separate thing. The main problematic unit coming out of this change is the king crab. So we've actually reduced their health. So overall, they're weaker against non-splash units, such as tier 1 units compared to the end of CBT1, but stronger versus splash. Now, the crazy thing with the king crab, I don't know if David saw this. I don't think I raged to him about this at all or messaged him or any of the devs. But the king crab, I don't know if they changed anything. I think they increased the attack speed. They reduced the attack delay or something. And the king crab got to the point where in the last beta phase, and I didn't realize this until I played a very high level player who'd figured this out, could kind of attack like this. Where I don't even know if I'm explaining it well enough. Let me show you all on camera. Basically, it would move, start attacking, and then move. It was like animation canceling, where basically the king crab could essentially, it felt like it was moving and shooting. When it was controlled really well, it was crazy. Whereas before that attack speed patch, it always felt really awkward. Like they'd kind of lumber up and be like, ugh. And then they'd like slowly move forward. And I think attack animation canceling is a really good mechanic in order to, if you micro this thing really hard, you can get 20% or 30% or 50% extra value out of a unit. But when you microed the king crab against basic units, recalls, blinks, whatever in this scenario, it felt like you made it 300% more effective. And I think that's too much. And this was the same example early on in Age of Empires 4. And I'm realizing I should have sent this feedback back to the team. I don't know if I did or not. This was obviously a few weeks ago, the beta. You could do this with like scouts in the start of Age of Empires 4, where the scout in Age of Empires 4 at the start of the game was like, ugh. Ugh. And it'd do like 3 damage an attack. So if you just left it attacking, it would do like friggin' 1 damage every 6 hours. Like it just did nothing, right? But you could instantly attack cancel and do another attack. So, and you could do this with like knights and stuff as well, I think. So you could basically make your scout be like attack, cancel it, attack, and it would be like 3 damage, 3 damage, 3 damage, 3 damage. You could make it like 500% stronger, something like that. Like some insane amplifier to the point where it was like, oh, I have to micro this. And I think it's really good to have these like niche little micro things like this, even though people will say, oh, it's not intuitive or something like that. You need to have details like this in an RTS. Most people won't even notice their opponents doing it if they're a low-level player, so I don't think it really hurts the casual experience. But it's one of those things where you should never feel like you have to do it to get value out of the unit. And I think when there's such a big gain, that can be an issue. So obviously that needs more testing. This was just a, sort of intuitive thing, but I remember I told a bunch of the other high-level players about this. They started doing it and they were like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is broken, dude. they're like king crabs are like 10 times better now. Because I remember I'd had experiences where like I could just move and shoot recalls and stutter step really like decently versus them. And I remember I had this fight and I was like, oh cool, I can gun down these king crabs, and like 3 king crabs killed like 30 recalls just like gliding on top of them and landing damage and moving and landing damage. And I was like, oh my God, you can do that. So not sure if that's an issue or not anymore, but definitely something we'll keep an eye on in the next beta test. See if that's still as abusable as it was. Recoil ability. Delay before recoil increased from 1.2 to 2 seconds. No way, that's huge. 0.8 seconds, guys, that's a big change. We want to try a slightly bigger penalty to recoiling out in the middle of combat. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. I'm okay to try it. I've always said recoils feel like the most unfair mechanic to play against. Even though when you're playing with it, you're like, oh, I need to do a lot of things right to make this work. Honestly, I'm erring on the side of this might be a little too big. Maybe 1.5, 1.6 seconds is a little better, but we'll kind of see how it plays out in action. The big thing that I'd given feedback with recoil personally was I really wanted there to be a ping on the minimap when your opponent recoils to a base. The reason being that when you try to attack multiple bases or harass it all against a recoil player, if you're not watching the screen there, you don't get... If you're watching, you see a visual animation above the base when they start recoiling. You have 1.2 seconds to get out of there before the army recoils on you. If you're not looking in that 1.2 seconds, there's just no way for you to know. And I felt like that punished players who aren't frantically, like it makes people not ever want to engage with a recoil player. So I've requested that. I hope they do manage to put that in the next beta test, because I think that's just a thing that makes it feel more fair. Where, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of skill in terms of the recoil player having to split up and choose where to recoil, but it just felt like information-wise, it was a little bit uneven. So I'm hoping that goes in. Advanced Recoil and Stinger both no longer deal bonus damage versus Big. We wanted to clean this up so they fit with the new counter square. Fair enough, that makes sense. Stinger and Swift Shocker both have increased health. These were slightly on the underpowered side during the first test. Really? The Stinger? Stinger, Swift Shocker, these were like the most brutal all-ins with Stinger, Swift Shocker. They're so insane. These units are Zergling speed. How do I describe this to a StarCraft player? Imagine if you could make, I don't know, a Cyclone? Think of it, yeah, it's like a Cyclone. It's like a modern Cyclone, but it moves as fast as a Speedling since the very start of the game. Yeah, they're insanely good. You have to be really careful with buffing these. With testing a small buff. I mean, if it's only a small health buff, it's probably okay. The main difficulty for such fast-moving units is we just can't go a bit too strong or else they will snowball. The first video I did for Battle Ace was like, this deck's OP, you know, and it's the classic Wasp, Stinger, Dragonfly, which is still one of my favorite decks. And even when people were saying this deck isn't that good anymore, I was still winning at least half of my games at very high rank in Battle Aces, doing it every game. You know, without even really thinking about the counters that much. I was just like, I just go Wasp, Stinger, Dragonfly every game. That's how I play this deck. And it's very much a multi-pronged deck, right? It's all about multitasking. It's very much like I don't want to actually play the countering part of the game. So it was kind of silly, but you just got to be careful with those units. They were fragile. I feel like, to me, they felt very well balanced. So if it's a health buff, I hope it's very small. That's my only request here. I don't think these needed a lot of tinkering. I think they were definitely a unit. You want units that are that fast to feel like they're on the weaker side, because your job with insanely fast units is to find your opponent's weak point, dive in, and fight a grossly unfair battle. It's the same thing with Mutalisks in StarCraft. Same thing with light cavalry in Age of Empires 2 or Hussars. You're not running into their pikes. You're running into their backline and raiding their base. And it's the same thing with these, where Stingers will just dive in and kill a base and run away. Dive into their back natural, their second base. They think 2 mortars is going to keep that safe? Nah. You just send 2 units in front, tank the first volley, and the mortars are dead before they get a second shot off. Like, it was crazy how quickly you could kill them. All right, guys, next up we've got, let's get through the rest of this. This post is almost finished. We're finally getting there. Sorry for making such a long video on this. Bomber's splash radius is decreased, health increased, and damage against anti-big added. What? So bombers, the suicide unit's going to be better versus anti-big units like destroyers. I guess you can like dive in and blow up their specialist units. Interesting. But health increased is kind of crazy because they already increased their health, so they no longer die to splash damage. Maybe the idea now is even more so you need like 2 mortar shots, 2 shocker shots, whatever, to hit a clump of them to actually kill the clump. As long as 2 shots kills a clump, I think it's okay. If it's taking more than 2 splash damage shots to kill a clump of bombers, I think it's a bit too crazy. So Don't get me wrong, it's hard to use this unit, and I think the real problem with the bomber is always going to be its difficulty of use. The bomber strikes me, I'm going to make a prediction now, 2 years from now, 2026, July. Battle Aces, people finally realize the bomber was already broken because everyone's comfortable enough with all the other mechanics in the game that Parting and the best players have finally figured out exactly how to micro bombers and when to squeeze them in and how to use them just like perfectly. And they are part of overwhelming all-ins that are ruining the meta or something. Like, it's just one of these units that I feel like people aren't going to use correctly because it's like so the game's so fast and frenetic, it's hard to make sure they're used effectively. So I think it's one of these units that I think the bomber is just going to be difficult to have in a good space long term early on. So if we want to see it a lot, you're probably going to need to make it a bit overpowered. Just you're going to have to be very ready to tone that down as people get better at using it. Bombers are small, small beats anti-big. Yeah. Overall, bombers are similar in effectiveness against tier 1 units, but they now also counter anti-big units such as the Destroyer. So you can make new combinations like Crusader Bomber to deal with combinations such as Shocker Destroyer. What's interesting here is the Shocker Splash beats Bomber small, and Bomber small beats Destroyer anti-big, so the positioning in combat matters quite a bit. That's a crazy fight. Crusader Bomber against Destroyer Shocker sounds insane. I would love to see that. That'd be really interesting. They've also increased the health of the Raider guys. Nothing too interesting there. They've said, look, it's tankier, but it's still slow. It's still not that easy to get in a worker line, but if it gets in there, it's a bit tankier. It'll kill a bunch of stuff. Fair enough. I do kind of miss the old Raider because it was just stupid. Like, I think it wasn't OP at high levels, but it was just obnoxious. It was like a Hellion that just moves at the fastest speed you've ever seen, you know, it was Night Stalker and Dota at nighttime, or Bloodseeker with the Bloodlust on him, where you're just like, you're just running around killing workers. They've also reverted the Wasp damage change. The Wasps were doing 15% less damage versus workers. At the end of the last patch, they've actually reverted that. So the Wasps are going to go back to doing pretty good damage versus workers. And 2v2 specific changes. Now, this is crazy, guys. Snipers deal less damage in 2v2. Mortars have less health in 2v2. There are people out here who are like, oh my god, that's crazy. You can't be making specific weird rules like this. I'm okay with it. I don't know, man. I feel like 2v2 is a little oppressive. I do think I really want to see bigger maps and different maps for 2v2. I do think that's going to be very important as the game goes on. I also understand it's harder to test things as maps change. So you kind of want to perfect it on a small map the game first before you go into that, perhaps, maybe. These are the most offensive units in 2v2 during CBT1s. They were the first units we've tackled in 2v2 since CBT1 ended. And you know what's funny? It's like one of my last YouTube videos I cast was Sniper Valkyrie. It dominates 2v2. And it's obviously because like mortars can't do anything if snipers are out. But then if you're on like Sniper Mortar, the opponent can come in with air units. But then you get Valkyries to dominate the sky as the ultimate like long range air unit. So it was all like, I have the longest range ground units of the sniper. Like the mortars can just beat everything until snipers come out, and then Valkyries, you know, on the skies. And it was a bit standoffish. It's interesting. I don't know what these numbers are, minus 20% damage or something, but basically trying to just force 2v2 to be a bit more active. I'm curious to everyone's thoughts. Is this an inorganic change? Do you need to change the design of the units and the maps? Should you not add specific rules like this? Should you? I think it's going to be okay. Finally, I will leak this temporary Battle Aces portrait that our artists have put into our internal builds. Now, this freaked me out when I saw this before. I didn't realize he's just showing it on his account. I think David Kim's taken a screenshot, which is why it says David Kim there, because I was staring at this for a solid minute going, that's not what David looks like. What? And then it's like, oh, Ted Parker, art director, has a nickname of Senpai in our art team. This one is Tenpai because it's a temporary portrait. I was like, did David change what he looks like? What is happening? I was like, what? How else would you balance the units when they work differently in 1v1 versus 2v2? I think you make the maps a bit more open for 2v2 or something like that. But of course, you make maps more open in 2v2 and then players get ganged up on, and it's a bit harder to work together and team up. This is in StarCraft, something we've seen a lot. So just to touch on this final point with the 2v2 specific changes before we wrap up the video, in StarCraft, we saw that in the last few years of StarCraft 2, maybe 4 years, it led more and more to a very turtley map pool where players shared a base, they had a shared ramp, easy to take protected expansions, and it was like you just wall off and turtle, and it was very much like late game macro war. And people who like dynamic movement-based gameplay friggin' hate 2v2 during that period. They're like, this sucks. And then in the last map pool change, they went back to like 5, 6, 7 years ago, where the map pools are like, you're separated from your ally, you have wide ramps that are hard to wall, all your bases are exposed, there's a billion different harassment angles, there's gold bases everywhere that encourage you to take even more dangerous bases, and it's once again like chaos. You know, there's so much variety, so much cheese, so many rushes, harasses you can do, which I personally love because of the variety and the fact that every game feels a bit different. But then all the players who liked the working together and walling off your base and building up the macro, they hate it. So we saw one of the biggest outpourings of how dare you guys make such bad maps. These maps suck. Very vocal. All the people that were playing tons of 2v2 over the last 4 years felt like their entire world was upended and they're forced to play a completely different game. Meanwhile, everyone who liked 2v2 8, 6, 7 years ago has hated 2v2 for the last 3, 4 years because it's just been boring as crap in terms of just turtling and macroing. So I think that just reminds us that there's like a balancing act in terms of different players do want to play the same game mode in different ways. Whether you just give different maps and different vetoes, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Age of Empires, and I reference this in pretty much every RTS video because I think the Definitive Edition does things so well. And what I love about that is that you can, you know, the ban and the veto system, you can pick Mega Random and Nomad, these maps that are just crazy different to playing a normal Age of Empires game. You can also play Arena, which is like you start with stone walls around your base and you guys get to just macro. You can veto those maps, or you can even star them and pick them and say, I want to play that map. And it is nice because you have such a drastically different ladder experience based on which of those maps you choose without the balance itself changing. To me, that seems nice, but it also seems like a more complex, hardcore, and I think antiquated system that Battle Ace's design is probably not aiming for because they kind of want everyone playing the same game to a certain extent. Maybe you just need to take into account that and make some more, you know, different special rules and stuff if you want everyone playing the same map and playing the same game. But I don't know. For me, I love having those vastly different experiences. So new maps, make us more maps, make us more maps. I'm just going to join that cry with the rest of the community. Let me know if you guys think there should be a lot of maps and multiple maps. Even if there's just 2 or 3 maps available, I think it'd be really fun. But I know it adds complexity, which is a little scary. Like, you know, Clash Royale is all the one map, keeps it simple, keeps it consistent. But I think it would be really cool. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you're excited for the next Battle Aces CBT, as they've called it. I really wish they just called it closed beta or something. I love when people start using their inside lingo just naturally because they're used to it. But CBT sounds either like a therapy term or something that's very popular in a dark corner of the internet. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.